Hello, students. How are you all today? I hope you're having a wonderful time and enjoying your IELTS studies. My name is Gavin, and I'm from Gate English Training School. In this course, we are looking at IELTS writing. Specifically, this is our third lesson today, so if you haven't seen the previous two videos, go back and watch those. In the last video, I left you a slide at the end to show you all the different kinds of graphs we might do for task 1 writing. So let's have a look at those. Do you know what we call all these different things? Some of you know, very easy. And if you don't know, you should know because they're not difficult things to know. We have column graphs. We could also call these bar charts. So column graph, column graph, column graph. We have line graph, just the one line graph there. We have maps. That's a simple word. There's 3 maps there. 1, 2, 3 maps. We have a diagram or a flow chart that's showing you the process of doing something there. These ones here, we have tables. Now, I've actually only got the one diagram in there. Sorry about that, but we'll have a look at some diagrams, I think, in our next video. Okay, so column graphs, maps, line graphs, tables, flowcharts, and diagrams. Not all diagrams are flowcharts, but flowcharts are a kind of diagram. Okay, so that's vocabulary you should know and you should be using in your writing, although usually at the beginning of the question, it will tell you. So don't worry too much about that. So for today, we're going to look at 4 of those different kinds of graphs. Line graphs, column graphs, pie charts, and tables. Now the thing is, these 4 kinds of graphs essentially make up probably 85% of all the IELTS questions. Maps and flowcharts and things like that, those usually only probably make up about 15% of all the questions you get. Line graphs, column graphs are very common. Pie charts and tables also so. All right, so first of all, let's start with line graphs. Here are 4 different line graphs. We already looked a little bit at this one in our last lesson there. And you can probably just see that there's not a huge amount different. We see one that has 2 lines, 3 lines, 4 lines, or more than 4 lines. Generally, of course, there'll never be one with just 1 line. That would be a little bit too simple to write about. Okay, we're going to look at this one today, but if you look at this one, some of the key points might be the fact that the red line was almost always higher than the blue line. That's something I might write about there. I might look at the fact that there's a very low period here, but the highest period is around here. There's a bit of a peak period and the 14th day there. Even though it's not the highest for both, it's the highest probably in total there. I might look at some other specific things, but they're the main features that I would be putting forward. For this one down here, same kind of thing. I'd be looking at the fact that we've got a general increase over time. And if you remember last time, we talked about the ranking. So I talked about the fact that there is a very clear one ahead of all the others. Petrol and oil was always much higher. And there's a big gap down to coal and natural gas, who battled it for 2nd place. And then down the bottom, the other ones are always much further behind. Okay, I might actually say are instead of were, because we have 1980 through to the future 2030 there. So I would talk about that ranking and the fact that there are 3 separate groups there: petrol and oil, coal and natural gas, and then we have nuclear, solar, wind, and hydropower down the bottom there as 3 separate groups. You might talk about the fact that there's a kind of the first half of this period up until about here, there's quite a bit more fluctuation, and then they kind of all a bit more stable in the future, or they're expected to be quite stable in the future. Things like that. So let's have a look at this one here in more detail. So let's say this is in a place. Let's say I'm not going to do the introduction. Let's just say this is in the average amount of food eaten by British people. I'm going to say British, just because that's just one of the most common things used in the IELTS test. This is grams of meat. If you're not sure what that means, that's the grams of eaten on average per person in a week, maybe. I don't know the time period exactly. So the main thing is when I look at this graph, we can see that, you know, pizza's falling, but the other two are rising, with pizza starting as a more popular food, but then fish and chips becoming much more popular. So I might look at those three and how they interact with each other. The other thing I might look at there is the total here. Well, that's probably about 70 and 30. That's about 100 in total, 300 there. That's about 400 grams per person of these three foods in 1970. Let's say that's just above 200, just below 300. So let's say that's 500 in total, 500 in total. That's 1,000 grams in total. So it's, you know, we can say that it's more than double the total amount of food eaten, of these fast foods eaten in 1990. There's some of the things we would look at reporting. Now, for all of the samples we're going to look at today, I'm going to do some different things. I'm not just always doing the same kind of thing. But start by looking at those main features. So what I'm going to do for this one is I have 3 BP1s. For those of you that don't remember or missed the last video, BP means the body paragraph. So we have our introduction, then our body paragraph. This is our BP1, our main feature paragraph. We start by reporting the main features of that line graph. So what I want you guys to do, and again, you will need to stop the video for a second and read through these 3 paragraphs. Which one of these do you think is the better paragraph and why? Now, this should take you probably 2 or 3 minutes to do this, so please pause the video, look at the 3, which one is better and why. Now, I'm not going to wait for 2 or 3 minutes, so hopefully you've stopped, restarted. Okay, so when we have a look at this, before I give you the answer, let me show you some of the things we're looking for. Well, first of all, I started with the same sentence for all 3 of them, and then changed. Let's have a look. Pizza compared to fish and chips and hamburgers. So we managed to talk about all 3 in one sentence. This one just talked about pizza. We talked about it being higher, so there is a comparison, but mostly it's just about pizza. Okay, second one. It talks about pizza, fish and chips, and hamburgers. So right away, we can probably know it's not going to be the second one. In fact, the second one is the worst one here. So pizza decreased slightly, then fell rapidly, then it remained stable. Second popular was fish and chips. It grew slowly. It reached this level, and then finally this level. So this is what we call a very mechanical paragraph. This is not a good paragraph. This is not the way we should be writing in the IELTS test. I mean, the language isn't bad. I wrote it, so there's not really grammar mistakes in there. The first and the third, however. So let's have a look at those first sentences again. Highest at 300 grams compared to 100 grams lower for fish and chips and hamburgers, respectively. So it's a little bit mechanical still. Let's have a look at the third one. It was the highest consumed food at this level. It's per week, okay, grams per week. Then it fell in popularity to be overtaken by both fish and chips, which became the most popular, and hamburgers. So you can see that this one is a nice, good, broad main feature sentence. So this is the better BP1. This is the good body paragraph. Again, let's analyze that first sentence again. It's quite a complicated sentence. It's a long sentence, but it starts with saying, this was number 1. It went down. These 2 both overtook it, with fish and chips becoming the most popular. So we managed to say this was most popular here. Now this one's most popular. This one's gone down. These 2 have gone up. So we've covered a lot of things in one sentence. And that's what we kind of do with that first sentence in our BP1. Also, you can see the signposting language I've used in all 3 of these. When first analyzing this graph, we can see. That is the signposting language. If you want more information on signposting languages, please go back to the second video in this course. Okay, Then we can see in our next sentence, despite the decline in pizza consumption, total fast food consumption grew, particularly from after 1980. So it's after here, it started to increase very rapidly for those two and stopped declining very much there. So despite the decline, from which point it doubled. That's meant to be doubled, with the total in 1990 being around 1 kilogram compared to only 450 grams in 1970. So that was my phone. I got my phone with my clock on it there. And sometimes I have to move my phone to be able to see the bottom corner of my screen. Okay, so these two sentences are really good examples of a main feature paragraph. Very broad sentences. Now, maybe in your next paragraph, you're going to have some more sentences like this, and maybe a couple of sentences like this. But again, the main point is we want the broad main feature paragraph and sentences that look at everything combined. And we want some sentences that look at details, but not one thing at a time. You know, like this is not too bad. Second most popular in 1970 was fish and chips at a rate of 100 grams, 20 grams higher than hamburgers. At least you're comparing it's second most popular. So that kind of compares it to everything 20 grams higher than hamburgers. So you're also comparing it to hamburgers. So you are comparing it to different things. Okay, so again, if you want to read through them again in more detail, have a look at the main difference in the grammar structures between those two. We're going to move on and have a look at column graphs. Okay, again, we have 4 different column graphs, and the first one we already looked at last week. And you can see again, I've tried to choose slightly different variations. We have 2 of them that just go compare 2 or 3 things in each section, and one where we have 2 separate kind of graphs. Now, again, you don't need to know the words here, so please do not be complaining to me that, oh, the words are too small, I can't see them. We're not looking at that right now. We're going to look at one of these in a moment. But when we look at them, first thing I see at this one is that the top graph and the bottom graph, they look the same. Okay, the numbers are actually very different, but the pattern is the same. That this is the first, this is the second, this is the third, this is the fourth, and in a very similar rate to each other. For this one, we can see the same. This is always first, this is always second, this was always third, but while these 2 are increasing the whole time, this one went up and then fell. So that the gap here, which one are we looking at next? Yes, we're looking at this one next. So the gap here has become much smaller compared to the large gap between all 3 of them here. Okay, so I'd be talking about the overall, the ranking, and the gap between them and the trend over time. So we're going to look at this one next for our look at column graphs. So first of all, this one, it might not be very clear, so let me just go over what we have here. So the chart shows the percentage of male and female teachers in 6 different types of educational setting in the UK in 2010. We have men and women in kindergarten, nursery school, primary school, secondary school, which is middle school and high school, college, private training institute, and university. It's like a private school. College and university are different kinds of things. In different countries, it's a bit different. So I think of a college in Australia is private and a university is public, but in the UK, I think it's a bit different there. Okay, so primary school. So these 3 are for children. These 3 are for adults. That's the one thing you need to think about. Although I think in the UK, college can be senior high school. You can have colleges there as well. They're very private secondary schools preparing you for university. Okay, so please take a look at that. And in a moment, after you've paused your video, I'll go over it in a second. So please stop your video for a second.